Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Maheen Humayun and we're here with Taha Kehar. We're going to be talking a little bit about storytelling, about fiction, about the process of it, and hopefully some new and exciting things if Taha is willing to share with us. So
Hi,
let's,
Maheen.
how are you?
All well, all well. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me in
Sure.
Liberty Books.
I'm
Yeah.
excited. Happy weekend, everyone. Friday feelings. Let's get into the weekend talking about some great books, great fiction, great writing. So, the first thing I wanted to kind of get into is just the very premise of storytelling. What does it really mean to you? Because it comes in so many different shapes and forms. And as someone who's a journalist and a writer and a critic, how do you kind of perceive that? How would you communicate that to maybe younger writers or people getting into that field?
So, storytelling for me is fundamentally about perspectives. Rather than what happens in the story, I'm more interested in who's telling the story. What perspective is it coming through? Because that perspective filters all the insights that you throw into the story. It can't entail you vomiting out everything on a piece of paper. Everything spills into the page that matters once you realize what perspective it's coming through. So I think without a sense of what perspective I'm telling you a story from, and this is primarily the character's point of view, I don't think I can really tell you a story because
And that
everyone has their own perspective, for lack of a better word, on the events that take place in the story. Yeah.
that is true. So, would you consider yourself a storyteller outside of writing, like in your regular everyday life?
Oral narratives, perhaps. I do enjoy telling stories. I love having conversations. So those conversations inevitably entail some form of storytelling. But
Definitely.
I think I prefer the, the written word when it
Mhm.
comes to storytelling because I feel more at ease with it. I think with conversations like the one you and I are having at the moment, there's always this possibility that you'd stammer. There's always that sense of uh, like this very moment right now where I stammered. I don't like that. I think stories need to flow if they need to be meaningful, and the pauses have to be somewhat conscious. You can't just throw pauses in because you're trying to find the right words. So I feel more comfortable with the written word.
No, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I feel like when you have the time and space and that intimacy that you have with the blank page or even hopefully the complete
I think
page,
we writers are reclusive. We don't like to um, speak so much about what we do as
there's
opposed to
pressure that comes with it, right? When you're
there's a
speaking
lot
out
of pressure.
as
I'm
opposed to
already palpitating about this,
it's
so
relaxed, it's casual, don't worry about it. We got this. But I
we got
agree with
this.
the
Yeah,
pressure that comes with speaking in front of a group of people or speaking to a group of people. I guess you can't articulate yourself to that same extent that you do when you put pen to paper. And I think that's beautiful and magical. And I feel like we
exactly.
don't give writers enough credit for doing that, right? The very act of staggering creation or grueling creation. It is,
Hmm.
in fact, magical. And I feel kudos to every writer for doing that constantly.
Uh-huh.
So something else, this is one question I'm always curious about, and I like specifically asking writers this question.
Hmm.
What would
You're
you
a
say?
writer yourself, so you can
I
answer
know,
it
but
better than I
other
do.
writers
Yeah.
also, it's always nice to hear how
Hmm.
everyone perceives that. But what would you say, since communication is so integral to creating conversation and dialogue and observing the world around you, how would you describe communication, or what does it really mean to you, and through your lens, what does communication look like?
I think for communication to be effective, it has to be meaningful. And
Definitely.
sometimes you find yourself writing for a specific audience because that's the audience you're writing for. But then one fine day you realize that's not your audience, and your storytelling or the lens through which you are viewing the world it's slightly blurred, it's skewed in some way. Maybe it's a little different now. So I don't believe that communication should be directed solely towards a particular audience.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to first understand what you want to communicate, and the audience finds its way towards you. I know a lot
I
of writers who I know a lot of writers who have a specific audience in mind, that our audience doesn't like big words and our audience likes a romance. But I don't believe in any of that. I think the most fascinating stories are told when there's no pressure to address a particular audience. I think
definitely.
sometimes, it seems very self indulgent for a writer to say that I'd only write for myself. I don't. I do write for an audience. But I don't allow the audience to put that kind of pressure on me where I feel I cannot express myself. Yeah,
Yeah, I love that because I think at its core, when there's a story churning within you and you can all like visualize the path that it's supposed to lead, you can't have that kind of skewed by the kind of audience you're hoping to
mm,
reach out for. And I think a social media plays a big part in that because there is a very specific audience that certain things are geared towards. I think so much of the writing is lost in the process of that. Like, I don't know, it's very complicated and confusing, but at the same time, it's exciting because you get to see and read so much more out there. It's so much more accessible.
exactly,
But
exactly.
lots of weird feelings about social media.
Social
But
media. Oh god. Yeah, still
seriously,
figuring them out. Yeah.
I did want to ask you some general questions about just being a writer, being an author. Some
hmm
really basic ones, but I feel like we've never spoken about these before. So here
We might
goes.
as well.
Okay,
Yeah, why
so
not?
one book that you have read over and over again, like a book that you devoured.
So I used to read The God of Small Things every single year.
No way.
And
I did not
yes,
expect that.
I
Okay.
used to read it every single year. I've stopped doing it recently. Um, I used to also read another Gulmohar Tree by Amir Hussain. Um, and I go back to it because those characters, the two characters in that book, they resonate with me, and it's almost like I'm jumping from one mind to the other because I feel like I'm that character at one point in time, then I'm the other character. So
I
there are
love that
various reasons. As far as the God of Small Things is concerned, it's just the beauty of the language.
for sure.
It's breathtaking. So yeah,
It's breathtaking, but it's also a lot. And one of my
it is a
questions
lot.
is
It is.
about the power of language, but let me just ask you right now. How do you think the power of language affects you? So we kind of take it in so many different ways, but what do you think
Mhm.
has the biggest impact on you? Is it prose primarily?
I am drawn towards poetry and prose. I love poetry. I am a terrible poet. I like to say I dabbled in bad poetry before I discovered that it was actually prose that I was writing.
Don't we
But
all?
uh, don't we all? I think it's a very stereotypical thing to say that I was a poet before I was a novelist. But I enjoy poetry, and I really enjoy beautiful Urdu poetry. I barely understand it, but I love it.
Same here, and
And
I long to understand it on that like same level. My
exactly.
grandmother, she writes and reads Urdu poetry a lot, and I'm like I aspire to understand every single word because it just cannot be translated.
I've
And
invested in a lohat, and I've been really, you know, investing in that, trying to find words that I don't understand. But it's remarkable.
have you ever
As far as
written anything in Urdu?
I tried, I tried translating a ghazal when I was in second year of school. This is back.
Oh,
I'm not going to reveal my
that
age, but it
is
was a long time ago. Um, and yeah, it wasn't that bad. I just felt like a part of it was not really the original, and it was just me trying to, you know, figure something out on my
yeah.
own. But I
I
don't think I
think
could ever write in Urdu.
I wish
It,
I've only written one thing in Urdu and I never showed it to anyone. It was a short poem and I was really embarrassed because it wasn't good enough. But I've always wanted to kind of get into that. But I feel like so much of it comes back to the language that we think in and the language we communicate in constantly. And I guess that
Mhm.
drives your writing so much, that
For me,
passion.
it's a mixture of the two, Urdu and English, and a little bit of Sindhi as well. But for me, the dialogue comes very naturally in Urdu and English.
Hmm.
So a kind of uh,
There's a word for it.
mixture of the two. Yeah,
I
it's
can't
a
remember the
commingling of two languages.
yeah.
Yeah, the dialogue comes like that because we speak like that. There,
Definitely,
it's
exactly.
very difficult to not squeeze in an Urdu word into an English sentence that you speak. So
And
I
I
like
think
to reflect
that is
that
the
in.
beauty of it also, right? Like the beauty of
Hmm,
Pakistani fiction or generally South Asian fiction, because Jhumpa
mhm,
Lahiri also does that. She was trying to do
exactly.
an Italian. I remember the last time I'd gone to one of these panels and she was on it. She was saying she's trying to do a mixture of Italian and English, and I found that so fascinating
That was fascinating. Yeah.
because
Did it work though? I wonder.
I have
But
no idea. I never checked back in. But okay, so my next question is, this is so generic, but I love this question. What's a book that inspired you to get into writing aside from the ones you've already mentioned?
the book that got me to get into writing, I
If there was
think
one.
there were multiple books. The books that really got me interested were nonfiction books, oddly enough, and I write fiction. So I read a lot of nonfiction about Pakistani literature while I was in my teens, and I was like, I want to be a part of this. I want to see what I can add to this. So I think that was one thing. Um, I read a lot of Urdu literature while I was in my teen years, 17 and 18, because I had to study it. So Umrao Jan, Anarkali, um, those things were a part of the Urdu syllabus. So I had to read all of that. And I think it did shape my imagination in so many ways. And I said, I want to write something like this one day. Not now, but one day.
One day.
One day.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. I love how certain stories, characters can just inspire us in ways that like
Mhm.
sometimes it's so subconscious you don't notice it, and then it's years later and you're like, okay, I remember like this one specific visual or this one specific line, and that's always like resonated with me. I think that's
Exactly. That's the way it is.
basically all the feelings. So, did publishing your first book change your process of writing in any way?
My first novel of Rift and Rivalry was a historical novel, and I don't relate to it as much as I did back then. I thought it was, for me, just an exploration of partition from a modern lens, just the lingering impact, the psychological impact of partition through the generations. Uh, and then I felt that soon after that book came out, I became a journalist, and my concerns were fairly contemporary. I
Hmm.
no longer thought about history. I thought about what was happening around me. So rather than going deep into the past, I was actually swimming through the present. And under those circumstances, I had to put forward a contemporary narrative, which is why typically Tanya was so different from my first book. It
I think
was
that's
hopelessly
exciting about it.
contemporary.
No, I
Yeah,
love that. Do you feel like these two parts of you, like the novelist and the journalist, complement each other?
they do. I think when it comes to journalism, I, I get very fact driven when it comes to writing fiction, and that's also not very good. I get very caught up with this idea of world creation. I feel I need to flesh out that reality before that character finds its place in that world. So I think that is a little bit that I get from journalism. What's happening? Who, what, when, why, where? Uh,
Journalism is the one. I love that though.
yes, it's all there. But I
I
think
guess
the
everyone's process
contemporary
is
focus, yeah,
That's great. So, would you like to honor us with a little passage from typically Tanya? And then we can get.
Typically, Tanya. All right. When you would ask me to do a reading, I was wondering what I should choose. Yeah, there it is. You have the Indian version. I have the Pakistani version sitting here. It's like
I want the Pakistani version also.
it's
We could
it's
go buy
published by
that.
Liberty Books, and it's
Guys,
right
buy
there.
the version published by Liberty.
Yeah, little bit of product placement there. Moving on. Uh, so I thought I'd read a bit from the book that I enjoy even now because I had a great deal of fun writing it. It gives away a little bit of the plot, but I don't mind.
That's okay.
So this is 11:45 p.m. and the character Tanya Shaukat has a visitor, an unexpected visitor. All right, here goes. Hafiz is sitting on the sofa in my room. Fortunately, Mummy is visiting one of her relatives and has not been lurking around the house. Lurch is probably in a dark corner of the kitchen, eavesdropping. Not that I can do anything about it, though. Is everything fine? I ask Hafiz with concern. You sounded worried over the phone. Tears gush down from his eyes and moisten his cheeks. Hafiz takes my hand into his rough palms and moves closer to me. For a second, it looks like he's about to say something, and then instead, his fingers clumsily travel to my shoulders, pulling me towards him. He presses my body against his, tilts his head, and kisses me. I haven't been expecting this, but somehow it feels like the most natural thing in the world. I give in, kissing him back. A few minutes later, he wriggles himself out of my embrace, clumsily rises up from the sofa, and struts out the door. I follow him to the staircase and watch as he makes a dash for the front door. His movements are swift, as if his actions were prodded by a fear I cannot immediately understand. It is only after the latch of the door clicks into place that I realize that he is gone, and the moment that subsumed my darkest fantasies is over. I run a finger over the length of my upper lip, checking for traces of that intimate caress, but it's already fading. Already, what just happened is beginning to feel like a dream. I pull out a packet of Marlboro Lights and light a cigarette, observing how its fumes curl in the air. Minutes later, the smoke disappears, but a smoldering scent hangs over the room, the aroma of an unsolved mystery.
That was so great. While you were saying that, I was like, I wish the whole session could be you just reading to us because that was lovely.
We can
Thank
do
you.
another reading if you run
We
out of
should.
questions. Yeah.
For sure. No, I think that was, I love that part in the book. And I just love the way the characters come to life. I think that's one of my favorite things, especially Tanya. I'm obsessed with her. And as we have in the comments as well, someone saying, Huma says, I love Tanya. Retweet. So, one thing that really
Rare to
fascinates.
hear that, but okay.
So
Yeah.
one thing that really fascinates me and something that you have mentioned a little bit before is
Mhm.
writing through the female gaze, and you said that that's something that really interests you and fascinates you. I wanted to kind of get into that. What was it that drove you towards this perspective, and what is it about the female gaze that appeals to you?
So I'm often told that is Tanya you? Because I think everyone loves a good autobiographical bent to a novel. They just love it when you say, I am the person I'm writing about. But that's not true. So I always tell them that it's a very courageous version of myself. And they're like, isn't it fascinating that you come up with a courageous version of yourself that's a woman? Surely you being a man can, negotiate public spheres just, being a man. And I said, weirdly enough, the women in my life have been the most courageous. And I think that is why I opted for the female gaze. I was very conscious of using that. And that's where this idea of perspective comes in. I tried it with the third person perspective, felt it was too distant, too remote, too convoluted because I felt like I was eavesdropping, like Lurch in the reading. And I didn't know that I didn't know if I could pursue it that way. And then I was drawn towards the first person narrative perspective, knowing perfectly well that if I was going to use that, it was going to be her voice. And I had to think this through because the first person narrative perspective for me is not just about interiority. It's not just about these are my feelings, these are my thoughts, and I just spill them out on paper. I knew that this character had to have her silences. There were moments when she would brush things aside. There were moments when she could pursue a thought, something that was troubling her, and then just instantly retreat because she felt uncomfortable venturing into that space. So that's what intrigued me the most about this first person narrative perspective. And I knew that there were certain things I couldn't access when it came to Tanya as well. So it worked for me because what I intended to do was provide this psychological insight into a character who doesn't just vent about her feelings and emotions all the time, but she uses this format of the diary. As you know, there are timestamps in the book, and there's a Dear Diary format. The timestamps don't just allow her to talk about her emotions endlessly. There are moments where she pauses, she just takes some time to understand her own emotions. Sometimes she addresses nothing that is troubling her. And then there are things that she addresses beautifully. And that's why I think the first person narrative perspective and the female gaze allowed me that freedom to go where I could go and not go where I didn't feel like going. Some people said things like, "Oh, but why didn't you go deeper and deeper into her psyche?" And I said, "Okay." I laugh at that every time because people give me that question every now and again. Some people say, "No, no, you went as deep as you should have gone," and other people say you should have gone deeper. And I say, "Look, what you have is a character who is evolving over time. Typically, Tanya is not really about the characters growing endlessly. There isn't a clear trajectory. Some characters stay the way they are, others grow up, others evolve. Tanya evolves in her own way, and she does it without any major cataclysm in her life. She's in that one moment and she experiences it. So to get back to your question about the female gaze, I was drawn to it because I knew I could achieve so much with it, and I was very scared of it because I knew I could mess it up royally.
Of course,
So
it is really tough, but you did it and you
yeah.
did it so well. And I think what resonates with a lot, I'm sure what resonates a lot with readers is
Mhm.
the fact that Tanya has this dimensional personality where she doesn't always go after what she's thinking. She doesn't always tackle the problem. And I think that's something that a lot of people can understand. And I think that's what kind of like drives us to wanting to know more
Mhm.
about her. And maybe that's why they ask you, why don't you delve deeper into her psyche? Because everyone
People
essentially
love
wants
her and they hate her, which is why I think someone had told me that you're putting this book out there, but you do know she's not exactly the most likable person. I said,
to.
so what? I'll get people to write to buy two books, one to keep and one to burn. Not that I'm advocating book burning; it's a horrible practice, but um,
But that is a
people
good
have their own.
response. That's true. You don't
Yeah.
have to love the protagonist of a book to love the book in itself. I
Mm.
think it's about maybe understanding the plight. And even if you connect with one part of the protagonist, if you understand their journey, even if it isn't a
Mm.
really big and drastic one, I think that's something
And I
that
think
really
with
is.
Tanya, the journey continues. There is so much more that needs to happen. Some people expected a predictable ending, which I thought was I don't know. I was like, what? You want her to get married? Okay, she doesn't get married. Something else happens to her. Great stuff happens to her. But why should a 20 something be married off to a guy who's seemingly very dubious?
I agree,
Mm.
definitely. I think that conversation is something that drives a lot of discussions here. Obviously, because
Indeed.
so many books are rooted in the romance, and that's, I guess, a lot of the book, right? And
It's
it's
an
nice.
anti rom com, this book. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's nice to see a working woman, a woman who's kind of all over the place and dynamic and exciting and a little bit mean sometimes. And it's nice to see that because a lot of the times people, I think, glorify that, right? But I think
Hmm.
the way you show it is almost raw and you view her as she is, messy and everything. And that's what I love about her, I think.
Mhm.
She's real. I feel her.
Yeah.
But that did kind of take me back to what you had been talking about. I think this was back in 2020 when you had asked us where we would see Tanya today. And I think that's something that I want to hear from you. Where do you think Tanya would be today?
Oh God. Um, Tanya would be in her 30s, and I think her life would be in a very different place now because when I was writing her, back in 2016, this book was written in November 2016 until I think July 2017, and it was out in 2018. So it's been 4 years, and our lives have changed fundamentally with the pandemic, with so much else going on. I think her life would be very different now. I think she would be a very lonely person. I imagine her very lonely.
I can see that.
Mm.
I feel
Yeah.
like post pandemic, I don't know,
And
do
I
love.
imagine her, yeah, and I imagine her still trying to be a friend. So she has the capacity to be very mean, but she is fundamentally an empath. She'll crib and whine about it, but she'll never tell people how she feels about them. She'll still be there. She'll never tell Sonia to her face that you've done this to me, you've done that to me, but she'll feel it. And she'll s- she'll still be there for them because throughout the book she finds a way to be present for the friends, even though by the end of the book, okay, I'm not giving anything away, but friends are the ones who are very well, I'm giving a lot away now. uh, Friends often deceive her, so I think she would be fundamentally very lonely, and that in itself is a take-off point for a sequel. So
Yes, is that happening?
not right now. I've flirted with the idea. I've even written out a chapter,
Oh,
um, and I just put it aside because I didn't want to write it because it was too soon. I would like to see her evolve during her 30s, what she would be like. Would she be like her friend Topsy, who was a 30 something lawyer? Or would she defy all stereotype? Would she become more like her mother? Would she make the predictable choices? I don't know yet. So I think I'm living that life and trying to figure it out.
wait, I think until the
So,
story
which in
goes.
itself gives away the fact that I'm probably throwing a little bit of autobiography in there, but uh, I'll just
But
leave
that's
that to the
yeah.
imagination of
I
readers.
think as you maneuver life, you
Mm,
understand so much about your own work as well as you
mhm,
discover more about yourself and society. And I think that's what's exciting about writing and bringing
mhm,
characters to life because it's not just about their discovery. At the end of the day, you discover so much about yourself, maybe. And it
mm.
might not be truths that you're telling yourself, but it might be about other people. And
Exactly.
that's what kind of I want to ask you in regards to Tanya. Did you have a lot of conversations with the women in your life while you were writing her?
I did a lot of conversations. And some of those conversations I still remember quite vividly. I wouldn't want to
Amazing.
disclose too much, but just things like there was this point in this narrative where she broke down, and someone who read that bit said, "Look, she didn't break down there. She didn't break down there. She didn't break down there. Why is she breaking down there?" Right? And I said, "Okay, maybe she shouldn't break down at all." And and that made sense to me because when I read it now, and I read this book again for our session, I said it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. She doesn't have to resort to tears. Um, I think it's a stereotype that women cry more than men. I think men cry more than women, as you can tell from this book. because all the men are just emotional fools.
No, I
And
like that. I think but I find it really interesting because typically, pun intended, but typically I love to read male characters written by women. It's just I feel
Mhm,
like there is that like beauty in it, like be it someone
mhm,
like Austen or someone even more modern. There's something exciting about seeing what that male character will live up to and what is their journey, what is their story, and what are their thoughts. And then you come to the end of the book and you're like, okay, this was written by a woman, and that's why I love it so much. But I feel like what's changing in the dynamic now is the way people are writing different characters from different lenses and perspectives, and they're showing this multitude of emotion and feeling and thought, and
mhm,
a character that's actually really vivid and dynamic and three-dimensional, a character with flesh.
mhm,
And that's a beauty, I think, of fiction today that maybe didn't exist a
mhm.
few years ago. And today I think, yeah, of course I fall in love with a man from a book written by anyone or a woman, like, because the way everyone writes is different. The way you create a
Mhm.
character is exciting and different. I think that's what I love about
Exactly.
literature in general. But yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I often feel that the men I create are unlovable. So
Who knows?
everyone would fall for. I believe if you've seen Lost in Austin, one of the things she makes him do, she basically, this is about a woman who goes back in time and switches just places with Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. So
Really?
one of the things, yeah, and she makes, I forget what she did, but she was just so smitten with the guy, and she makes Mr. Darcy do all these lovely things that he did in the book, and she
Oh,
lives in that dream world. So I don't think that could ever happen. I don't think the men in my book are even lovable. They're just
that is very interesting.
very
I guess
repulsive.
love is different for everyone as well. It depends. Some people are drawn to toxicity as well, so you never know.
Tanya isn't. But Tanya isn't drawn to toxicity. She dismisses it.
I
I think we're
love
all
that.
drawn to toxicity, but not her. So.
It's the inner demons, right, that somehow the characters show us in different
Mhm.
ways. But aside from Tanya, tell me about another character that you personally were really drawn to while writing the book. I'm sure all of them, of course, but another one that really resonated with you. When you read the book again, you're
I,
like, oh, I love this character.
I really enjoyed her mother's character. I had a lot of fun writing it. I knew it was going to be a bit of a caricature, but I drew on my own experience. My mother used to say that so much of this character is me. And
Love that.
I was like, and I don't know what she saw in that because she was, I mean, it was a bit of a exaggeration of our lives. But I think her mother's character was one I really enjoyed. I liked writing the character of Khirat, who is her friend, because she is a counterpoint to Tanya. She comes from a world that Tanya couldn't even dream of inhabiting because of her privilege. And the friendship is the unlikeliest friendship in the book. Everything
Okay.
else makes sense except for this friendship. And that is the friendship I wanted to focus on because it's bolstered by so much negativity that happens around them, and they just find each other and befriend each other. They have similar experiences, and they learn to love each other for the way they are, and they accept each other's differences as well. I did enjoy writing the character of Hafiz, even though he is kind of like an absence in the book. um, I often wonder how much of myself went into that character sometimes, but that's just a personal note. um, I do feel that some of the characters that were not particularly conventional, like Topsy's character, I had fun writing those because they have these one-liners. They're just wickedly irreverent. Such characters, I had a ball of a time writing because I knew what I could say. And I read this book just for this session, and I realized that I actually put this down. I was so ashamed. I was like, how do I know all of this at the age of 26, which is when that was the age I started writing, 25, 26. That was a long time ago. So
That's exciting also. Was there anything about the book that surprised you when you read it? Did you read it after quite some time?
I think I was surprised by how, how shameless I could be at times and how audacious I could be. I was surprised, but I was also surprised by this undercurrent of despair that runs through the book. I think it wasn't very conscious, but I realized that even though it was billed as a chicklet and sold as this romantic comedy, it really wasn't. It was serious fiction disguised as something pretty and fun and yellow and, you know, this funky little character with red glasses.
So cute.
And I
Glasses.
realized that, you know, I should do more of this. Like
You
this
should.
act of but I realized that I was surprised that I could do it. I don't think I could do it now because I think the folly of youth is that you think you can get away with anything. Now you're so conscious of what you put down on paper.
That is
And
true.
it's distressing to even imagine that you can do a book like this.
But I
Uh,
think that's what's so exciting and interesting. The fact that what appeals to a lot of people at first is, of course, the color, how pretty and bright and exciting it is. I think that's something that just generally
mhm,
judging a book by its cover, a lot of people do. But what's interesting is when you get through the book and you actually get through the meat and the flesh of it and you understand how each of the characters have their own storyline, how each of the characters have their own problems, and there's something so much deeper and darker going on within the city and
mhm,
within them. I think that layered perspective is what a lot of us, I think, are drawn towards, especially I think in a time like this also. It's the fact that it's great when things are pretty and magical and sparkly and glittery. You're like, oh
mhm.
my God, I love this, I'm excited. But when you really get into it, that's when you understand, right? And that's where the connection comes from. And
Exactly.
I love that feeling, I think. That's something that is hard to find in fiction constantly. So you should definitely do more of that because we are here for it.
I'm glad. I'm glad. Uh, I'm so delighted that you like it because it's very rare that people enjoy a book like this because of the sheer unlikability of the protagonist. It's just that way. As I said, one read and one to burn, without obviously advocating book burning.
Without actually
But
burning it. Yeah.
yeah.
That is exciting. But I do think a lot of people love the genre generally. And that is
Mhm.
something I did want to ask you about. How do you decide what genre your book will be? Is it something that comes at the beginning or something that you kind of lean in towards? And this is something I'm particularly excited about because of your new novel. Congratulations on it. And I do want to talk a
Thank
little
you.
bit about that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So,
for
so what I like to do when I write is to not obsess over the genre. I don't want to get so caught up with it.
hmm,
I write because I'm curious about a particular character's perspective on some event. And that perspective defines where the book will go. So I've never really believed in these very neat genres. Sometimes I feel like you have to bust those genres and try to merge them and distort them because sometimes if I say I'm writing crime fiction, I'm probably not writing crime fiction. I'm probably telling you a love story set against the backdrop of crime. And I like that about a story that you can inhabit that world of bliss and romance while being aware of the violence within it. So that's what I like. I don't really choose a genre consciously. I think it comes to me and I and it comes to me while I'm writing. And I think about these things when I'm actually done with the book, and I say, okay, this is a chick lit. This is purely literary fiction. This is that, and this is this, and this is
How do you
humor.
feel about the word chiclet?
I hate it. I think it's disgusting. It's disgusting. It's
Oh my
awful.
God. Same here. I have so many feelings about it, but I love the idea of genre bending because it's so exciting. I feel like a lot of the times we're trying to box books into certain genres, and sometimes they just
Mhm.
don't fit. Like, why can't a book have multiple storylines and touch upon multiple genres? Because that is, in fact, a reflection of life.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know. Yeah, continue.
Just so I was saying that usually I organize my books according to genre because it's very much based on my feelings. And then
Mhm.
the more books I buy, I realize I'm not quite sure which genre this specific book will go into. So recently I color coded my shelves and I was like, this feels good, this looks good, and now this is my
I
new
can see the
perspective.
color coding against in the background. It's
I'm
fascinating.
proud of it.
Unique.
It was really easy for me to find Tanya as well because I have like a
Yeah, I
yellow
think
shelf.
it stands out. It's a very um, sharp yellow.
Yeah. I was thinking it's
Yeah.
also one of like a nice way to get me into reading different books of different
Mhm,
genres as well.
mhm.
Because usually I'd always like be going towards like one shelf. I'm like, okay, this month I'm just into romance and I'll just be reading all the books from that one shelf. And now I'm like, maybe I want to change it up a bit. And I think that's what's exciting about fiction these days and the relevance of it. I think how it reflects life and that's changing.
Because when we come into this world, we're not told that your life is going to fall into this rom-com and your life is
Exactly.
going to be a mystery. So our lives are like soap operas, so to speak. And a soap opera has various tracks. There are various strands. Sometimes there'll be a murder. Sometimes there'll be a wedding, and surely those are aspects of a life. So or our lives. So why don't we just stitch them together and create a new genre? That's what I feel personally.
I love
So
that
yeah, I
though. I
don't choose that.
agree.
Yeah,
We should.
yeah, we should.
Maybe
But yeah,
feel like you should come up with a catchy name for that and see how it fares. Like Gen Z would love that, but I don't know.
Gen Z would love it. Yeah.
But it's interesting because I meet a lot of young students and I ask them, I'm like, oh, what are you into reading? But a lot of the time, I feel like bite-sized fiction is what gets them through.
Hmm, that's
It's all
what it
about
is.
time, which is so different. I feel like when we were younger, I feel like I had endless time to read, like endless amounts of time, and
Everyone is caught up with some gadget or the other. I'm guilty of it as well. I mean, you and I are on a gadget right now.
the
It's
irony of it all.
irony of it all, how better of us.
Definitely.
Anyway, uh,
We do have a few comments that I thought I would just read.
mhm.
So, Homa asked, when will we see a sequel? We did kind of discuss that. So,
We won't for now, but we might. Uh,
never
you
know.
might see a very aged Tanya sharing her views in the world.
Umar asks, being a journalist, did Tanya emerge from your subconsciousness? Was it your way to see the world from the eyes of, oh, it's just popped up here, of a
Okay.
female? It was brilliantly written, by the way.
A part of me did think of Tanya as something that emerged from my subconscious because I was working in those days. I used to do the graveyard shift, and this character came to me. I was done with pages. It was
Can't
very
believe
late. It was 9:30, 10, 11. I don't remember what time it was, and I just put this down, the sentence down. I can't trust these Kareem chauffeurs, and I just took it further. And obviously, I radically restructured the book as it went on. But I remember that moment, and it wasn't a fear I had, but it was a fear somebody else had. But with time, I realized there was so much of me in her as well, even though I had to distance myself constantly and say, no, that's not me. But then, that's also part of me. That's also part of me. As I say, courageous version of me. So, as far as seeing the world through the eyes of a woman, I think a woman would have done a better job of Tanya. I I think there would be an air of confidence with which she would have written it. I don't think I would have been able to master that. It takes,
I like that you challenge yourself as well, because
yeah.
I think so much of growing comes back to constant challenges. And of
Hmm.
course, writing from the female gaze is definitely a challenge.
Hmm.
But so, there's another question from Umar as well. What next? What genre are you venturing into? I heard something about a KLF. Okay, let's talk about it. Whatever you can spill.
Okay, so I wrote a novel soon after Tanya came out. This is back in 2019. It was very different. It's more plot driven. Typically, Tanya is not really plot heavy. It's more character driven. So I wanted to talk about uh, not the youth this time, but a fairly older generation, a generation that saw the 90s and the 80s and the violence associated with that period, the the distress that went into it. So I decided to do something strange. I just started writing one day, and it became a novel 6 months later. And I decided to put it aside and not publish it, primarily because there were various factors involved. I used to publish in India at the time, and that was no longer an option. So I put it aside. I reinvented myself completely as a writer. Now I decided that it was time to put this book out there. I'd been shopping it around for almost a year, year and a half, and it's coming out next year. So it's very different from Tanya. I don't know if people will accept it in the same way that they accepted Tanya, but it is primarily a book about death, um, and just overwhelming sense of loss that one feels under those circumstances. But it's also not a very gloomy book. It's a book about embracing the new and the changes that come with life after that. Uh, I don't want to
Exciting.
reveal too much. There is a lot more to it, but yeah, it's
No, that
not
just sounds exciting. It
it's
just
not as
sounds
bleak
very
as I made it
different
sound. Yeah,
from typically Tanya, but I think that's what's, again, the challenge. I think that's amazing.
yeah.
And is there anything else you wanted to tell us or let us know about the book? Or is that it?
About what book? That's the question.
The new one.
The new one. Okay. I'm not going to reveal too much, as I've been calling it a postmodern detective novel. It appears in all my bios, and people are just wondering, what is that? Ye kya hai? What is this? Why has this been on your bio for all this time? Where is this book? So I call it that because I don't see it as the typical detective story. There is no one detective. We are our own detectives in that world, and it's basically about someone who decides to have this. There's this woman who dies in the book, and instead of a funeral, she wants a party. So it's an unconventional demand. It's something that very few people will resonate with because there's a lot of rona dhona that goes into uh, our funerals and just the way we grieve. And this is a bit different because yes, there's a burial, but there's a different kind of celebration, and it's all about what happens during that celebration. Um, it's
I am
just
so curious to know more.
yeah,
Definitely.
yeah,
I
it's just
think that
that.
sounds really
But
interesting.
let's back. Let's get back to typically Tanya. If you want me to do a quick reading, I can do that as well.
Yes, why don't
Um,
we end with a nice reading? I think that would be perfect.
do you have any recommendations on where I should read from? That's
Uh, I think maybe somewhere towards the end.
towards the end. Oh God, you want to give too much away. All right.
On another note, guys, if you haven't read the book, you need to read it now.
All right. Okay. It's 6 p.m. in the evening. Mummy's reaction to my quitting the Daily Image is abysmal, just as I had expected. Beta, this is an extreme reaction, my mother says as she watches a Pakistani drama on Hum TV. She seems to have graduated from talk shows at a quick pace. Did mummy fight with Auntie Syra while I was making key decisions in life? Or has she finally understood how silly these talk shows are? The man tried to get me to sleep with him, I respond sharply. I'm sure my reaction was justified. Beta, you're too young for principles. Mummy appears unfazed by what I've told her. You should never leave a decent job. What are you going to do now? Should I start looking for boys? Mummy, calm down, will you? I say, I'll be fine. I have some cash to last me a while. There's some freelance opportunities that I can avail as well. Just relax. From the nervous way in which Mummy is looking at me, it appears she is unconvinced by my explanation. That's the problem with having a mother who lacks empathy and courage to take a stand. Now, if were Shabana Azmi's daughter or Benazir Bhutto's daughter, things would be very different. I'll call Mimi or Saira, Mummy mumbles and walks to the phone in the lounge. It's time to intervene. Great. Another round of Rishta shopping is about to begin. I should stay as far away from home as I can. If I don't, I'll find myself trapped on yet another string of dates with Ahmed the boring businessman or Sohail the mama loving nut job who had insisted we share a room with his widowed mother after our marriage. I can't afford to take such risks. Nothing can be allowed to impinge on my feelings and my freedom. It has to go through me first. Mummy, I walk over to the phone and yank the receiver out of her hands. Why can't you back off a little? Why must you poke your nose in all my affairs? This is my decision. Accept it and back off. No one is asking for your consent, or Mimi's or Saya's input, for that matter. Mummy's face turns ashen at my outburst. I feel strangely relieved, even rejuvenated by my sudden display of uninhibited rage towards her. Even though my telling her off was fueled by an impulse, it was a culmination of my anger and frustration with her meddlesome ways. After a long time, a burden seems to have been miraculously lifted from the inner chambers of my heart and unleashed directly at the person responsible. Fine, Mummy's voice cracks. I was just looking out for your best interests. Khair, what can I do? What can a mother do when her own child considers her to be a stranger? With theatrical restraint, Mummy rubs her eyes with her dupattas and hobbles back to the sofa in front of the TV. Why is she such a drama queen? Haji, bring me my chai, she hollers. By the way she's ignoring me, I can tell she's putting on a show for the alleged pain and pressure she's feeling after being spurned by her own daughter. Lurch scurries out of the kitchen with a cup of steaming chai within minutes. Begum Saab and Pakore? He asks. She waves her hand to shoo Lurch away, and he shuffles back into the kitchen. Hi, they'd made such a cute couple if one of them wasn't such an imbecile and the other one wasn't such a drama queen. If I know my mother well enough, she'll vent her anger by eating a lot of food over the next few hours and we'll be on speaking terms again by tomorrow. Mummy always finds a way to make herself at the center of attention. Unfortunately for her, she has a daughter with similar tendencies.
So great. That last line. Love it. Okay.
It's just
I love how
the,
you have that like comical element to it. I feel like it just brings everything to life
the
and
mother daughter relationship is something that I wanted to work on. Many people felt that she was very difficult with her mother. And oddly enough, the mother didn't mind because she was equally difficult with her. So it was more of a friendship than it was
I
anything
love that
else. And
dynamic. I think it's
because the conventional wisdom is that you speak to your parents a certain way, and there's a lot of adab and ihtaram. There is adab, there is ihtaram. I mean, they're there for each other at the end of the day. But
definitely
they're also two people who live together, and one is an adult and the other one is also an adult. They're not kids anymore, so they're going to have the occasional tussle. There's going to be some disagreement here and there. So why not allow it to reach the surface? Why let it simmer down below?
agreed.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So
And while you were reading, it made me think, what are your thoughts on audiobooks?
audiobooks. You want me to do an audiobook? Um,
No, I was just wondering, like, if you were to turn typically Tanya into an audiobook, would you want to
I
read it
wouldn't
yourself?
let my voice be part of that process. But
How would you choose the voice? Because I feel like the voice is so important when a book is taken into an audiobook because
I
you
would
see
be
the
very
character.
conscious of the person who takes it on. I would need someone who has this caustic wit, this sarcastic tendency to her. I don't want someone who is dull and boring. So I would
Definitely.
want someone who can really bring out the inflections that this book demands. There are various registers in which it's written. Um, so everyone sounds very different from each other, and yet all of them inhabit this one book, and it's just this cacophony of voices. So that one person who is responsible for the audiobook will need to bring all that out, and it takes time to get to
Definitely.
that level. Mm.
I agree. I have read a lot of audiobooks and I mean, listened to a lot of audiobooks and just been so irked by them because the characters didn't sound as I'd hoped they would in my head.
Mm.
I guess it's the same
And I'm also
feeling.
very conscious of pronunciations, which is why, um, like, like I said pakore right now. I should have said pakore. So I was very conscious of that. So,
That happens. So I
that
guess when
happens.
someone's doing an audiobook, they practice a lot. Umar says,
Yeah.
I would love to see Tanya on the big screen. Yes, that would be exciting. I feel like that would be very exciting.
Well, if you're making the movie, uh, like
You
why
shake it up.
not make it up? Yeah. No, honestly, I do think it's going to. It'll look good on the big screen, but I don't think the story would be the same. I do
Hmm.
think I would like it to be a
Maybe
little
even
bit
a mini series it could be interesting.
a mini series, maybe, because
Something to
there's
think
so much
about.
that happens to her that is primarily what happens. See, the first person narrative perspective also makes it difficult for me to talk about the other characters. So I do want to see what anybody who adapts this for the screen will do with the other characters, because everything is just Tanya and what she sees, and
Agreed.
there's this absence in the narrative as well, which is very
It would
difficult to
definitely
explain.
be interesting to see and view her from a different perspective also.
You have
So that
I'll
character's
bring
being
this almost grandparently view to the book to the film, because it'll be like me stepping back and seeing what somebody else does with it. So yeah,
that is true. Well, lots of exciting things to think about. And thank you so much. Conversation was so great. And that's it for
this
our
was
time.
delightful, absolutely delightful, and thank you so much.
We hope you guys enjoyed it
Yeah,
if you haven't already.
yes, definitely. Typically Tanya, available at Liberty Books.
Bye, everyone. See you.
Bye.